The espresso machine hissed like a vindictive serpent, a sound Elias Thorne had come to regard as the theme music to his life. It was 5:58 a.m. on a Tuesday, and the pre-dawn gloom of the Pacific Northwest clung to the windows of the Black Heart Café like a shroud. Inside, the air was thick with the sacred aroma of roasted coffee beans, single origin, ethically sourced, and untainted by the blasphemy of flavor syrups. Elias was a man carved from the same dark, bitter wood as his countertops. At 42, his hair was more salt than pepper, and the lines around his eyes were not from smiling but from squinting at a world that had become intolerably sweet. He believed in coffee. Pure, unadulterated coffee. A drink that was meant to be a stark, beautiful confrontation with reality, not a milkshake in disguise. His cafe was a testament to this philosophy. The walls were exposed brick, the furniture was reclaimed oak, and the menu was a study in minimalist tyranny. It was etched in simple, elegant script on a slate board behind the counter. Coffee, black. Espresso, solo or doppio. Americano. Cappuccino, dusting of cocoa only. That was it. No alternatives. No apologies. His sole employee, a young, pragmatic art student named Maya, slid into the cafe just as the antique clock on the wall struck 6. She tossed her bag under the counter and tied on an apron without a word. She was used to Elias's pre-dawn silences. "The hordes will descend soon," Elias muttered, polishing a porcelain cup until it gleamed. Desperate for their liquid sugar, forced to confront the truth of the bean. Maya smirked. "You're a regular coffee prophet, Elias. A Java Jeremiah." The door chimed, and the first customer of the day, an elderly man named Mr. Peterson, shuffled in. "The usual, Elias," he rasped. Elias gave a curt, approving nod. He poured a precise measure of a Sumatran dark roast into a cup and slid it across the counter. No words were exchanged. It was a perfect, unblemished transaction. For 2 hours, this was the rhythm of the Black Heart. A steady stream of locals who understood, or at least respected, the unyielding laws of the establishment. Then, at 8:15 a.m., the door chimed with a different, more cheerful cadence, and the universe tilted on its axis. She stood there, backlit by the weak morning sun, and looked around with an expression of unvarnished delight. She was all bright colors and sharp, intelligent angles, a vibrant shock against the cafe's monochrome palette. Her coat was a cheerful cherry red, and her smile was wide and unapologetic. Elias felt a muscle in his jaw twitch. She approached the counter, her eyes scanning the stark menu. Her smile didn't falter. If anything, it widened. "Good morning," she said, her voice like wind chimes in a cemetery. Elias grunted. "I'd like to order a drink," she announced, as if revealing a profound secret. "The options are before you," Elias said, his voice flat. "Oh, I know. But I have a special request. I'd like a venti, no, a large, half-calf, triple shot, sugar-free vanilla, extra hot oat milk latte with 2 pumps of caramel, light foam, and a dusting of cinnamon on top. And could you maybe draw a little heart in the foam? If it's not too much trouble." A profound, horrified silence descended upon the Black Heart. Mr. Peterson, mid-sip, choked softly. Maya stopped wiping the steam wand, her mouth slightly agape. Elias stared at the woman. He saw her clearly now. Bright, intelligent eyes, a dusting of freckles across her nose, and an aura of such relentless positivity he felt his soul recoil. "No," he said, the word final and absolute. Her smile didn't even flicker. "No to the heart. No to the abomination you just described. This is a coffee shop. Not a candy store. I serve coffee. Black. But I don't like black coffee, she said, as if explaining that water was wet. It's bitter. Life is bitter, Elias countered, a well-worn mantra. Coffee prepares you for the fact. She leaned forward, conspiratorially. But what if life could be a little sweeter? I'm new in town. I just moved into the old Henderson place on Elm Street. I thought I'd try the local spots. Elias felt a cold dread trickle down his spine. She wasn't a tourist. She was a resident. A permanent fixture of his personal hell. Elm Street, he repeated, his voice hollow. That's right. It's so charming. Anyway, about my drink. I do not have sugar-free vanilla. I do not have oat milk. I do not have caramel. I have coffee, milk, and cocoa. You may have a cappuccino. Her face fell for a fraction of a second before the radiant smile returned. Okay. A cappuccino it is. With extra foam. And the cinnamon. Elias turned his back on her, the rejection implicit. He worked the machine with violent precision, creating a cappuccino that was, by any objective standard, perfect. The microfoam was like white velvet, the espresso beneath a dark, complex symphony. He slid it toward her without the cinnamon. She paid, took the cup, and beamed at him. Thank you. Elias. Thank you, Elias. I'm Clara. Clara Evans. I have a feeling I'll be seeing a lot of you. She found a seat by the window, took a sip of the cappuccino, and made a small, appreciative sound. Elias watched her, a storm brewing in his chest. Clara Evans. The name felt like a threat. Clara Evans became a daily affliction. Every morning, at precisely 8:15 a.m., the door would chime and she would enter, a splash of violent color in his sepia-toned world. And every morning, she would attempt to order a drink so convoluted, so sacrilegious, it made Elias's eye twitch. A large, iced, blonde espresso with 3 pumps of white chocolate, a splash of heavy cream, and 3 scoops of protein powder, she'd ask on Wednesday. I have neither blonde espresso, nor white chocolate, nor protein powder, he'd deadpan, serving her a black coffee she didn't want but paid for anyway. On Thursday, how about an affogato-style frappé with almond milk and a shot of hazelnut syrup? This is not a gelateria. And we've discussed the syrup. She was a hydra of terrible ideas, for every request he cut down, 2 more grew in its place. She would sit at her table by the window, sipping whatever he deigned to give her, and work on her laptop or read a medical journal, a detail Elias, in his irritation, failed to register. She was always cheerful, always unfazed by his gruffness. She greeted other customers, learned their names, and within a week, she seemed to know half the town. Elias, meanwhile, was unraveling. Her presence was a grain of sand in the pristine oyster of his existence. He started muttering to himself, polishing the same cup for minutes on end, glaring at the door as 8:15 approached. Why does she keep coming? He demanded of Maya one afternoon. She doesn't even like the coffee. Maya, who was sketching in a notebook, didn't look up. Maybe she likes the company. This isn't a social club. It's a temple of caffeine. It's a coffee shop, Elias. And maybe she likes you. The notion was so absurd, so terrifying, that Elias fell silent for a full 10 minutes. He tried everything to deter her. He once, accidentally, made her Americano with a particularly bitter, high-acidity Ethiopian bean. She'd taken a sip, grimaced charmingly, and said, "Wow, that really wakes you up, doesn't it?" and drank the whole thing. He considered raising his prices just for her, but his sense of capitalist integrity forbade it. He thought about playing depressing, atonal music, but he couldn't bear it himself. She was impervious. The real turning point came on a rainy Monday. The cafe was quiet, the steady drum of rain on the windows a soothing rhythm. Clara was at her usual spot, and Mr. Peterson was at his, nursing his black coffee. Suddenly, Mr. Peterson made a strange, gurgling sound. His cup clattered to the floor, shattering, and he slumped forward, his face ashen. Elias froze, his blood running cold. But Clara was a blur of motion. In an instant, she was at Mr. Peterson's side, her cheerful demeanor replaced by a focused, commanding calm. "Elias, call 911. Now. Tell them a male, approximately 75, is unconscious, suspected myocardial infarction." Her voice was sharp, clear, and left no room for argument. She eased Mr. Peterson to the floor, checked his airway, and began CPR, her movements efficient and practiced. Elias, his hands trembling, fumbled with the phone. He gave the dispatcher the information, his eyes glued to Clara. She was a different person. The bubbly, frivolous woman who ordered dessert-like drinks was gone, replaced by a figure of intense capability and strength. She worked over Mr. Peterson, her countenance a mask of determined compassion. By the time the paramedics arrived, Mr. Peterson had a faint pulse. They loaded him onto a gurney, praising Clara's quick actions. "You saved his life," one of them said to her. "He's not out of the woods yet," she replied, wiping a strand of hair from her forehead. Her red coat was smudged with coffee and floor grime. As the ambulance pulled away, its siren wailing into the rainy morning, a stunned silence returned to the cafe. Elias stared at Clara, who was leaning against the counter, catching her breath. The vibrant, annoying woman was a hero. "You're a doctor." Elias finally managed, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. Clara looked up, her usual smile replaced by a look of weary professionalism. "Yes. Dr. Clara Evans. I'm the new general practitioner at the clinic. I started last week." The world shifted beneath Elias's feet. The ridiculous drink orders, the relentless cheer, the bright colors, it was all a facade for this. For a woman who spent her days confronting life and death, who held people's hearts in her hands, both literally and figuratively. The complexity of her coffee orders suddenly seemed less like an affront and more like a desperate plea for a small, manageable dose of sweetness in a world of overwhelming bitterness. He had spent weeks judging her for her aversion to the bitter truth of coffee, while she spent her days swallowing the bitter truths of life itself. Without a word, Elias turned to his machine. He didn't have her syrups or her oat milk, but he had an idea. He pulled a perfect double shot of his smoothest Brazilian espresso. He steamed the milk to a silky, velvety microfoam, hotter than usual. He found the small jar of cinnamon he used for his cappuccinos. He poured the milk, creating a flawless, creamy canvas. Then, with a steady hand, he reached for the cocoa powder. He wasn't an artist like Maya, but he tried. He dusted the surface, creating a shaky, lopsided, but unmistakable heart. He slid the cup across the counter to her. Clara looked down at it. Then she looked up at Elias, her eyes wide with surprise, and something else, a vulnerability he had never seen in her before. A single tear traced a path through the smudge on her cheek. She took the cup, her fingers brushing against his. The contact was electric. "Thank you, Elias," she whispered. He simply nodded, the storm inside him finally, mercifully, beginning to calm. The following days were a study in awkward recalibration. Elias's world, once so rigidly defined, had been cracked open. The Black Heart Café was the same, but he was not. He found himself watching the door at 8:15 a.m. with a nervous anticipation that was entirely new. Clara still came every day. But the ridiculous drink orders had stopped. She would simply order a cappuccino, and Elias would make it for her, always with the lopsided cinnamon heart on top. It became their silent, fragile truce. He learned, through snippets of conversation she had with other customers and the occasional, hesitant word with him, that she had moved from a bustling city hospital to this quiet town for a change of pace. She'd said she was tired of just treating illnesses and wanted to know her patients, to be a part of a community. Elias understood that now. The complicated drinks were a relic of her city life, a comforting habit she'd brought with her. One afternoon, as she was packing up to leave, she paused at the counter. "How is Mr. Peterson?" she asked. "He's home. His daughter says he's recovering well. He asked about you." A genuine smile, softer than her usual beaming one, touched her lips. "I'm glad to hear it." "He wouldn't be here if not for you," Elias said, the words feeling clumsy but necessary. "It's my job," she said with a shrug, but Elias saw the flicker of pride and relief in her eyes. "It's more than a job," he countered. "What you did, it wasn't just procedure." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the usual barriers were down. He saw the weight she carried, the long hours, the emotional toll. She saw the loneliness behind his cynical facade, the man who hid behind the purity of coffee because people were too complicated. "The coffee is always bitter," she said softly, "because it's the first thing I taste after a long shift. It's the taste of fatigue, of hard news given, of worries. I suppose I was just trying to cover it up. Make it something else." Elias absorbed this. He had viewed her drinks as an act of childishness. He now saw them as an act of survival. "I understand," he said, and for the first time, he truly did. This new understanding sparked a change, not just in Elias, but in the Black Heart itself. It started small. One day, Maya brought in a small container of vanilla beans, steeping them in simple syrup to create a homemade vanilla paste. "For my lattes," she'd said defensively when Elias raised an eyebrow. "You don't have to use it." But a few days later, a young mother came in, looking harried, with a crying toddler in tow. She ordered a black coffee, but her eyes were desperate. "Rough morning?" Clara asked from her table, her voice gentle. "He's teething. I haven't slept," the woman sighed. Without consulting anyone, Maya steamed some milk, added a tiny drop of her vanilla paste, and presented the mother with a small, warm cup of sweet milk for the child. The crying stopped. The woman looked like she might cry with relief. Elias had watched the entire scene from his post at the espresso machine. He'd said nothing. But he didn't throw the vanilla paste away. The next week, a regular customer, an elderly woman named Agnes, mentioned she couldn't have dairy anymore. "I do miss a nice, creamy coffee," she'd lamented. The following day, a carton of oat milk appeared in the small fridge under the counter. Elias claimed it was for Maya, but everyone knew. Clara had smiled at him that day, a smile that held no triumph, only a deep, quiet warmth. The Black Heart was softening at the edges. The menu on the slate board remained unchanged, but a small, handwritten note appeared on the counter next to the register: "Ask us about our available editions." It was a revolution in subtlety. Elias and Clara began to talk. Real conversations. He learned about her love for cheesy romance novels she hid behind her medical textbooks, her fear of spiders, and her dream of having a garden. She learned about his past, how he'd been a journalist in a previous life, become disillusioned by the corporate spin, and used his inheritance to open this cafe as a sanctuary of authenticity. I thought if I could control this one small space, make it pure and honest, then I could keep the chaos out, he confessed one quiet afternoon, the cafe empty save for the two of them. And did it work? Clara asked, her head tilted. He looked at her, at the splash of her red scarf against his dark wood, and gave a wry, self-deprecating smile. No. It didn't. The town's annual autumn festival was the biggest event of the year, and the committee, in a move that shocked everyone, including himself, asked the Black Heart Café to run the beverage booth. In years past, Elias had refused on principle, deriding it as a sugar-saturated carnival. But this year, with Clara on the committee and Maya looking at him with hopeful, puppy-dog eyes, he found himself grudgingly agreeing. The festival was a whirlwind of color and noise. Elias felt profoundly out of place amidst the hay bales, pumpkin displays, and children's laughter. He was manning a large industrial brewer, serving simple coffee and tea, while Maya handled a new, shocking addition, spiced apple cider. Clara flitted between her medical tent, where she was doing free blood pressure checks, and the beverage booth, her energy seemingly inexhaustible. She'd roll up her sleeves and help Maya during the rushes, her laughter ringing out. People are asking for something festive, Maya said during a lull, wiping her brow. Something with a kick. Elias grunted. The coffee has a kick. Clara looked at him, a mischievous glint in her eye. What about a festive fog? A chai tea base, steamed oat milk, a dash of that vanilla syrup, and a cinnamon stick. It was, by Elias's old standards, a monstrosity. But he looked at the happy, flushed faces of the crowd, at Maya's hopeful expression, and at Clara's challenging smile. Fine, he muttered. But we're calling it a spiced chai latte. No festive fog. It was a sensation. The drink sold out within 2 hours. People who had never set foot in the Black Heart were raving about it. Elias, to his own astonishment, felt a flicker of pride. He had created something people enjoyed, something that, while sweet, was still made with quality ingredients and care. It wasn't a betrayal of his principles, it was an evolution of them. As dusk settled and the fairy lights twinkled in the trees, the crowd began to thin. Maya ran off with her friends, leaving Elias and Clara to pack up the booth. They worked in comfortable silence, the sounds of the festival fading into the crisp autumn night. You were a hit, Clara said, breaking the silence. We were a hit, Elias corrected. He stopped packing, turning to look at her. She was bathed in the soft glow of the fairy lights, her hair slightly messy, a smudge of cinnamon on her cheek. She was the most beautiful, complicated thing he had ever seen. Clara, he began, his voice rough with unaccustomed emotion. All my life, I've believed that truth was something harsh and plain. That to sugarcoat it was a weakness. You crashed into my world with your ridiculous drinks and your impossible cheer, and you turned everything upside down. You showed me that sweetness isn't a lie. It's a choice. It's a kind of strength. He took a step closer. You save lives with your hands, and you saved mine just by walking through my door every morning and refusing to be pushed away. Clara's eyes glistened. Elias. The truth is, he said, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs, I think I'm in love with you. And it's the most terrifying and wonderful thing I've ever tasted. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away the tears that now fell freely. He leaned in, and he kissed her. It was not a sweet kiss, not at first. It was a kiss of shared bitterness and hard-won understanding, of two stubborn souls who had fought their way to a common ground. But then it softened, deepened, and became something else entirely, a promise, a beginning, a perfect blend. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Clara rested her forehead against his. So, she whispered, a playful note returning to her voice. Does this mean I can get a pumpkin spice latte tomorrow? Elias laughed, a real, full-bodied laugh that felt foreign and wonderful in his chest. Don't push your luck, doctor. 1 year later, the Black Heart Café was both the same and utterly transformed. The exposed brick and reclaimed oak remained. The core menu was still etched in elegant script on the slate board. But next to it was a second, smaller board, titled The Good Doctor's Prescriptions. On it were a handful of carefully crafted drinks, the cinnamon heart latte, the festive fog, and a simple, well-executed oat milk macchiato. The Black Heart had found its balance. It was still a sanctuary for those seeking a pure, unadulterated cup of coffee, but it had also become a haven for those in need of a little comfort, a little sweetness. The town, which had once regarded Elias as a charming eccentric, now saw him as a pillar of the community, his gruff exterior no longer a wall, but a familiar, well-loved quirk. Mr. Peterson had his own reserved seat, and he and Clara would often play chess on Saturday afternoons. On this particular morning, Elias stood behind the counter, a contented man. Maya, now his full-time manager, was teaching a new barista the art of the perfect pour. The door chimed, and Clara walked in, her white doctor's coat over her clothes. She was no longer just a customer, she was home. She walked straight behind the counter, a privilege granted to no one else, and kissed Elias firmly on the lips, to the cheerful whistles of the regulars. "Rough morning?" he asked, his voice low and full of affection. "The worst," she sighed dramatically. 3 sore throats, a sprained ankle, and I had to tell Mrs. Higgins her poodle is just overweight, not pregnant." She peered at the prescriptions board. "I think today calls for something extra. A triple shot, half-sweet, caramel drizzle, with whipped cream in." Elias silenced her with another kiss. "You'll have a cinnamon heart latte," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument, his eyes full of love. "And you'll like it." Clara laughed, the sound like the first clear day after a long storm. "Yes, sir." As Elias turned to make her drink, his movements sure and graceful, he looked around his café. It was full of life, of conversation, of the rich, complex aroma of coffee and the sweeter scent of steamed milk and vanilla. It was no longer a fortress against the world, but a part of it. A place of both bitter truths and sweet comforts. He finished the latte, creating a perfect, symmetrical heart in the foam. He slid it toward the woman he loved, the woman who had, with her complicated orders and her uncomplicated heart, taught him that the richest blends are often found not in the bean, but in the life you brew around it.